A single tipi could stay warmer than your house right now, even in 40-degree blizzards, using absolutely zero electricity or gas. I'm not talking about some massive bonfire either. The secret heating technique Native Americans perfected would blow your mind. But there's one shocking detail about it that changes everything. When you think about survival shelters, most people picture caves or log cabins. But Native Americans on the Great Plains had something way smarter: the teepee. These weren't just basic tents thrown together. They were engineering marvels disguised as simple homes. The whole thing started with wooden poles, usually around 15 to 20 of them. Lodge pole pines were the gold standard because they grew straight and strong. These poles stretched up to 25 feet tall, which meant you needed some serious teamwork to get them standing. The women were the architects here, and they knew exactly how to angle each pole for maximum stability. Here's where it gets interesting. Buffalo hides covered the entire structure. We're talking about 12 to 18 hides sewn together with sinew, creating a weatherproof barrier that could handle whatever nature threw at it. Buffalo skin wasn't just tough, it was flexible enough to expand and contract with temperature changes without cracking. The cone shape wasn't an accident either. Wind hits a cone and flows around it instead of trying to knock it over. Makes sense, right? While square cabins fought against prairie winds, tipis basically gave them a smooth ride around the sides. Storm coming? No problem. The whole structure would flex slightly, but stay put. Then there's the doorway situation, which shows how smart these builders really were. Every single tipi entrance faced east. Sure, catching the morning sun was practical. Who doesn't want natural light and warmth first thing in the morning? But the spiritual aspect mattered just as much. The east represented new beginnings and the daily rebirth of the sun. But here's what made Tipis absolutely brilliant for nomadic life: speed. An experienced family could have their entire home dismantled, packed, and ready to move in under an hour. Try doing that with your house. When the buffalo herds moved or seasons changed, home moved with them. The poles doubled as travoy frames for transporting goods, so nothing went to waste. The weird part is how this perfect system eventually had to adapt. As buffalo herds disappeared due to overhunting, families had to get creative. Canvas became the new covering material. It wasn't quite as warm or durable as buffalo hide, but it was available and lighter to transport. What's really fascinating is how every single element of tipi construction served multiple purposes. Those poles weren't just structural, they were transportation tools. The buffalo hides weren't just walls, they were blankets, ground covers, and emergency shelters. Even the rope and stakes had backup uses. This wasn't primitive housing. This was sophisticated, mobile architecture designed by people who understood their environment better than most modern engineers understand theirs. And once you had the structure up and weatherproof, the real challenge began: keeping everyone warm inside when temperatures dropped below freezing. Without heat, even the best-built tipi becomes nothing more than a fancy tent in a snowstorm. Native Americans knew this harsh reality better than anyone, which is why every single tipi had one absolutely critical feature right smack in the center: a fire pit. But here's where things get interesting. These weren't massive bonfires like you'd see at summer camp. The fires burned small and steady, almost like a controlled flame that never quit. Why? Well, too big and you'd smoke yourself out of your own home. Too small and you'd freeze. Finding that sweet spot meant the difference between comfort and misery. The fire pit itself wasn't just a random hole in the ground either. These were carefully dug shallow depressions, maybe 6 inches deep at most. The shallow design served a brilliant purpose. It allowed heat to rise naturally throughout the tipi space instead of getting trapped in a deep hole where nobody could benefit from it. Then there's the matter of who kept this lifeline going. Family members took turns tending the fire, even during those brutal late-night hours when temperatures plummeted. Someone always had fire duty. Always. Because letting that flame die meant starting over with flint and tinder in freezing conditions. And trust me, that's not a mistake you make twice. The wood selection became an art form all by itself. Not just any stick would do. They needed dry wood that burned slow and steady, producing minimal smoke. Oak, hickory, and certain hardwoods were gold. Green wood or anything damp? Forget about it. You'd create so much smoke that everyone would be coughing and crying, with stinging eyes that made daily life unbearable. What's fascinating is how these fires were positioned to work with the tipi's natural airflow. The shallow pit allowed heat to spread outward and upward, warming the lower living space where people actually spent their time. Hot air rises, right? They used this basic physics principle centuries before anyone called it physics. The weird part is how efficient these small fires actually were. Modern heating systems pump out way more BTUs, but they're heating massive spaces with terrible insulation. These Tepee fires heated a smaller, well-designed cone with multiple layers of heat retention. Less fuel, more warmth where it counted. Family cooking happened over this same central fire, which meant every meal added extra heat to the living space. 2 birds, 1 stone. The fire pit became the true heart of teepee life. Warmth, food, light, and social gathering all centered around those carefully maintained flames. But even the perfect fire means nothing if smoke fills your home instead of escaping properly. The real genius wasn't just in building the fire, it was in controlling where all that smoke went next. Here's where things get really clever. Native Americans basically invented their own air conditioning system centuries before anyone knew what HVAC meant. The secret wasn't just about keeping warm, it was about managing airflow like engineering masters. Those triangular flaps at the very top of the teepee, they weren't decorative. These smoke flaps worked like adjustable vents that could be moved depending on which way the wind was blowing. When storm winds came from the north, the flaps got repositioned to keep rain and snow out while still letting smoke escape. Smart, right? But here's the genius part most people miss. The whole teepee worked like one giant chimney system. Hot air and smoke naturally rise, but they needed somewhere to go. The smoke flaps created that escape route at the top, while small gaps near the ground let fresh air flow in from below. This created a continuous air current that swept smoke up and out. Think about it. You've got a fire burning in the center, producing heat and smoke. Without proper ventilation, everyone inside would be coughing and choking within minutes. Instead, the teepee's design created what engineers today call stack effect. Cold air enters low, gets heated by the fire, rises with the smoke, and exits through the top flaps. The really tricky part was adjusting everything based on weather conditions. Strong winds could blow smoke back down into the living space if the flaps weren't positioned correctly. Light winds meant the flaps needed different angles to create enough draw. Families became experts at reading wind patterns and adjusting their ventilation accordingly. Let's not forget the positioning strategy. Remember how teepees always faced east? Well, this helped with airflow too. Morning breezes typically came from predictable directions, and the doorway placement worked with these natural wind patterns to enhance the ventilation system. During winter storms, managing airflow became even more critical. Too much ventilation meant losing precious heat. Too little meant suffocating smoke buildup. Families had to find that perfect balance, enough airflow to clear smoke while keeping warmth trapped inside where people needed it most. The weird part is how well this system actually worked. Modern tests on replica teepees show that properly adjusted smoke flaps can clear a teepee of smoke in just a few minutes, even with a roaring fire burning inside. The temperature difference between the top and bottom of the teepee created enough pressure differential to keep air moving consistently. What made this even more impressive was how quickly families could make these adjustments. No complex tools or lengthy setup processes, just experience, observation, and quick movements of the flaps based on changing conditions. But managing smoke was only half the battle for staying warm through harsh winters. The real game changer came from something most people never think about: creating layers within the teepee itself. Fire and smart airflow could only do so much. Native Americans knew they needed another trick up their sleeve, literally creating a shelter within a shelter. Enter the inner liner, basically the world's first double-wall insulation system. This wasn't just any piece of hide thrown against the wall. The liner was carefully crafted from buffalo hides or later canvas, positioned to create what engineers today call an air gap. That trapped air became nature's insulation, slowing down heat loss like a thermal barrier. Pretty clever for people who didn't have fancy building codes, right? Here's where it gets interesting. The liner didn't go all the way to the top. It stopped around 9 to 12 feet up from the ground. Why? Because hot air rises, and they wanted that warm air to have somewhere to go. The liner created a cozy lower zone where people actually lived, while the upper area became a natural chimney for smoke and excess heat. Think about the engineering here for a second. Cold air wants to sneak in at ground level, so the liner blocked those sneaky drafts. Meanwhile, the space between the outer teepee wall and inner liner acted like a buffer zone. Cold couldn't penetrate as easily, and warm air had time to circulate before escaping. But wait, there's more. The liner also played traffic cop for smoke flow. Without it, smoke might swirl around randomly, making everyone's eyes water. With the liner guiding airflow upward, smoke had a clear path to the top flaps. It's like having invisible highways for air movement inside your home. Installation wasn't complicated either. The liner hung from the tipi poles using simple ties or wooden pins, creating that crucial gap between walls. Some families used decorative liners with painted designs, turning functional insulation into art. Function and beauty rolled into one, not bad for survival gear. The real genius shows when you consider materials. Buffalo hide naturally contracts when dry and expands when wet, creating a tighter seal during harsh weather. The liner moved with temperature changes, maintaining that insulation gap even when conditions got extreme. And here's something most people don't realize. The liner system was adjustable. During milder weather, sections could be rolled up or removed entirely for better ventilation. Hot summer day, less liner, brutal winter night, full coverage. It's like having a thermostat you could physically rearrange. This double wall approach kept heat where it mattered most, at human level where people cooked, worked, and slept. The warm zone concept maximized comfort while minimizing fuel needs, crucial when firewood wasn't always easy to find on the plains. Yet even the smartest liner system meant nothing without the right bedding and clothing strategies, because staying warm in a teepee required thinking about insulation from every possible angle, including what you wore and slept on. You know what modern sleeping bags and fancy winter gear have in common with Native Americans living in teepees? They both understood that warmth isn't just about the fire. It's about what you put between your body and the cold world around you. Plains tribes had this figured out centuries before anyone invented thermal underwear. They built their beds like master engineers, starting from the ground up. First came thick layers of dried grass, rushes, or pine needles to create a barrier between sleepers and the frozen earth below. Think about it. The ground steals heat faster than a pickpocket in a crowd. Then came multiple buffalo hides, elk skins, and bear furs, each layer trapping precious air pockets that worked like natural insulation. But here's where it gets really smart. Families didn't spread out like modern campers trying to claim their own space. Nope, they slept close together, sometimes with 3 or 4 people sharing the same sleeping area. Body heat became a community resource. Parents slept with children between them, grandparents got the warmest spots, and everyone contributed to the shared heat pool. The clothing game was next level too. While we might strip down to pajamas indoors, plains people layered up inside their teepees just like they did outside. Fur robes stayed on all night. Moccasins lined with rabbit fur never came off during winter months. Special winter mittens hung ready by every sleeping area, and thick leather leggings were standard indoor wear when temperatures dropped below freezing. Here's something that'll blow your mind. They had different outfits for different parts of winter. Early winter clothes, deep winter clothes, and emergency cold snap clothes. Each outfit was designed for specific temperature ranges and activities. Makes our modern approach of throwing on whatever hoodie is closest seem pretty amateur, right? Then there's the brilliant trick with robes and blankets. During the day, thick buffalo robes served as backrests and seating around the fire. But when night fell, these same robes transformed into personal heat cocoons. Families would wrap themselves so thoroughly that only their faces peeked out, creating individual warm zones within the larger tipi space. The weird part is how they treated their feet. Special winter moccasins had extra layers of buffalo hair stuffed inside, sometimes combined with dried grass or bird down. Cold feet meant cold everything, so keeping your foundation warm was priority number 1. Some tribes even had sleeping moccasins, softer versions specifically for nighttime that trapped heat while you slept. What made all this bedding and clothing strategy work wasn't just the materials, it was the mindset. They never expected the central fire to do all the heating work. Instead, they created multiple layers of warmth defense, from ground barriers to personal heat traps. But even the best bedding and warmest clothes couldn't solve every heating challenge these families faced. That's where some truly creative heating tricks came into play. Living in a teepee during winter wasn't just about building the perfect fire and hoping for the best. Native Americans developed clever daily tricks that turned basic survival into an art form. These weren't fancy gadgets or complex systems, just pure human ingenuity working with whatever nature provided. The heated rock trick might be the most brilliant hack of all time. People would take smooth stones from riverbanks and heat them in the fire until they were blazing hot. Then they'd wrap these scorching rocks in thick buffalo hides or layers of fur, creating portable heaters that worked like ancient hot water bottles. You could tuck one between your feet while sleeping, hold another against your chest, or even place them around sick family members who needed extra warmth. The rocks stayed hot for hours, radiating steady heat long after the fire died down to embers. But the creativity didn't stop there. When brutal cold snaps hit, families would hang extra buffalo hides like curtains inside their teepees. These makeshift walls created smaller, more intimate spaces that were much easier to keep warm. Think of it as building rooms within rooms, except your walls were made of thick, insulating fur that trapped body heat beautifully. Then there's the sleeping pit strategy that shows just how smart these survival techniques were. Instead of sleeping on flat ground, many families would dig shallow depressions where they planned to rest. Heat naturally sinks to the lowest point available, so these mini basements became cozy, warm pockets where hot air from the fire would settle and stay. Sleeping lower meant sleeping warmer, and every degree mattered when winter winds were howling outside. The flooring game was equally impressive. Multiple layers of brush, dried rushes, and animal hides created thick carpets that blocked ground chill from creeping up into sleeping areas. This wasn't just comfort, it was thermal engineering. Cold ground will suck warmth right out of your body, but these layered floors created barriers that kept heat where people needed it most. Cooking became a double-duty activity that deserves more credit than it gets. Every meal preparation meant more fire time, more heat generation, and more warmth circulating through the living space. Families would stretch out cooking tasks not because they were slow, but because the process itself was heating their home. Boiling water for tea, roasting meat, preparing stews, all of this kept fires burning longer and temperatures higher. The weird part is how these tricks work together like pieces of a puzzle. Heated rocks provided targeted warmth, extra hides created thermal zones, sleeping pits captured rising heat, layered floors blocked cold transfer, and extended cooking sessions maintained fire activity. Each hack was simple, but combined they created a survival system that could handle the most brutal weather. These daily techniques were just the beginning, though. When winter really showed its teeth, families had to make even more dramatic adjustments to survive the absolute worst conditions nature could throw at them. When winter hit the Great Plains like a frozen sledgehammer, Native Americans didn't just hope their teepees would hold up. They made serious adjustments, the kind that meant the difference between waking up alive or becoming a human popsicle. First trick? Downsizing. Families often moved into smaller tipis during the brutal months. Why squeeze into a cramped space when you had a perfectly good large tipi? Simple physics. A smaller space heats up faster and holds warmth better. Less air to warm means your fire works harder for you, not against you. Smart move when every piece of firewood counts. But here's where things get creative. They'd bank snow around the outside of their teepees like nature's own insulation. Sounds crazy, right? Using snow to stay warm. Well, snow traps air, and trapped air is one of the best insulators around. Some families even use chunks of sod, basically grass and dirt, stacked against the teepee walls. Free insulation, courtesy of Mother Earth. The fire management became an art form during these months. Fires burned longer, sometimes around the clock, but wood was precious cargo on the treeless plains, so every log had to earn its keep. Families rationed their fuel like gold, breaking branches into exact sizes and timing burns perfectly. Run out of wood in January? Game over. Then there's the indoor curtain system that would make any interior designer jealous. Extra animal hides got hung inside the teepee, creating smaller rooms within rooms. Think of it as the world's first studio apartment setup. These hide curtains trapped body heat in specific areas, so you weren't trying to warm the entire space, just your little corner of survival. The really clever families dug shallow sleeping pits. Not graves, obviously, but small depressions in the teepee floor where they'd lay their beds. Heat rises, sure, but it also settles in low spots. These mini basements kept the warmest air right where they needed it most. Plus, sleeping lower meant less exposure to any drafts sneaking in above. And the weird part is how they turned cooking into a heating strategy. Every meal became a 2-for-1 deal. Boiling water for dinner, that's steam heat. Roasting meat, that's radiant warmth. Even the preparation, chopping, stirring, moving around the fire, kept their bodies generating heat. During the absolute worst cold snaps, some families would stuff extra grass, pine needles, or whatever they could find between the outer teepee wall and the inner liner. More insulation, more trapped air, more warmth. It was like adding a winter coat to their already bundled up shelter. These weren't desperate measures. They were calculated survival strategies passed down through generations of people who knew that preparation meant the difference between thriving and barely surviving when winter showed no mercy.